Hi, Dr. Lang.
Hello.
Hi. So thank you for being part of our conference. Very, very happy to meet you and to, have you as part of our Festival of Prostate Cancer. Can you tell us what kind of doctor you are, where you practice, and a bit of your background?
Well, I'm a urologist, and I was chairman of the Department of Urology at the University of Washington for 19 years, and then I helped found our Institute for Prostate Cancer Research, which is a collaborative effort between the University of Washington and the Fred Hutch Cancer Research Center. And so I've been involved in prostate cancer research for many years.
Right.
And saw patients. Don't see them hardly at all because I'm almost retired, and but still an active member of our research group, et cetera.
Great. And how many papers have you written, more or less?
Well, I guess I'm an author on about 450.
Yeah. Which is a lot. I mean, I think I have maybe 20 or 25, and I think of myself as having spent my time wisely. To do 400, author or co-author. I mean, you're one of the greats of urology for our audience. So
I don't know about that, but I've been around the track a lot.
Yeah. So let's talk about research, how it gets funded, why it gets funded, and how patients could sort of contribute. And, we're not going to ask for anybody's money, but I want people to know, what those dollars go to and how they get spent. So let's start off on an even playing field for everybody. What actually is prostate cancer research? Where does it take place? Who does it?
Well, research, of course, I think your audience will know about. It's applying the scientific method to try to solve problems, and certainly in prostate cancer to try to make better therapies and for the disease. When I first got started in prostate cancer research, it was considered an old man's disease, and actually there were people who said, "Oh, don't do anything about it." But then, of course, we realized that the death rate was actually the second highest death rate among men for cancer after lung cancer. And in the early days, we did research, whether it's developing the assay for PSA or many of the other things we did before since. We got that primarily from the government, from NIH particularly, and then later on from the Defense Department. And you would have to write a very long, detailed research proposal. And then if you were lucky, you got funded, and then you did the research and made advances, which has been startling and over the last 30 years in terms of making an impact on prostate cancer detection and on treatment. Later on, we realized, those of us who did research in prostate cancer, that funding from the government was not enough to move as fast as we wanted to go. Part of that was because the funding for research went down over the decades, so that now, and certainly for the last period of time, if you wrote a grant, which usually took you 6 months, and then another at least 6 months before you found out whether you got the money or not, that the pay line was something under 10%, 7%. In other words, of those people who wrote the grant, only 7% would get funded. So to do the research, and more importantly, to recruit other talented people, both PhDs and MDs, to help us with the research was hard to do. And we realized we had to increase the amount of money that the government gave to us, which we were able to do with other people's help, Michael Milken particularly. And we also had to get private funding, because the research money that you get from the government was never enough to pay salaries and to do the most important thing, which was to gain information about an idea you might have. Because you can't get a grant unless you have data. to show that this grant is worth funding. And you can't have data without um, money. So it became a sort of a circular thing that how do you get data um, to then apply for a research grant from the government. And even when you got the grant, and we've been very successful at it, it was never enough. Not only to pay for the salaries, for instance, if you pay for the salaries of a medical oncologist or a surgeon, and to some extent, even the PhDs, the money the government gives you is not enough to cover it. So you have to cover it some other way. And that can come from an institution, but often it has to come from private funding that you get from other sources.
Yeah, and it's you raise a number of interesting ideas. I think one critical one is that research takes many stages. You proof of concept in order to, at a small level of funding, then the next stage, bring in your team, or expand your team, and then finally prove your concept in real world settings and such. And not only is it expensive to do in terms of salary and facilities and such, but it's expensive to do in terms of time, because for every hour you spend doing research is an hour away from a patient. Even at a PhD level, it's an hour away from investigating something else or teaching. So it has many different forms of expense at different stages. Yeah.
Well, and then there's the other problem is as I get older, it became more of a problem building a team, because this is a team concept. You can't really address prostate cancer without a team of both clinicians, medical oncologists, surgeons, and PhDs, basic science PhDs, and then what we call translational PhDs, those that want to be closer to the bedside in terms of taking the information from basic science and then converting it into applications for the bedside. And that requires also funding to attract talent that is still undifferentiated, and talent which has been differentiated from other institutions to try to get you to get them to come to your team, which might be better. So that also requires private funding. Yes, it's a major undertaking, and the story of prostate cancer research is an unbelievable story. Maybe not quite as glamorous as the Human Genome Project or what we've done in COVID, but it's close. And in terms of we've cut the death rate by 50%. All those people that never knew they had prostate cancer until it was too late, we're picking up a lot earlier, so we can cure them. And in those that we don't cure, we can, in fact, get close to cure or extend their life significantly. And that in the last decade and a half, particularly, it's been amazing.
Yeah. What's your assessment around the cost effectiveness of prostate cancer to date relative to the cost to society, in terms of life years, in terms of hours?
Well, that was an interesting question, because it used to be thought, oh, it's just an old man's disease. And of course, in those days, years ago, old man was anybody over 60. Well, of course, that's no longer palatable. But it's not an old man's disease necessarily. And initially, the 40,000 people were dying prematurely. I mean, it was like breast. Not quite, breast cancer does affect younger women than prostate cancer, but it still was in the same ballpark. And then we realized that it was a disease that significantly affected the quality of life of men. And of course, then of course, the ideas that you could do something about it and pick it up early was another big thing. So what is it? Its effectiveness in terms of the cost to society. Well, they've got all these measurements like quality life saved, and there's a whole medical formula or mathematical formula to try to figure that out. And that's been done many times, and it's been shown that not only for breast cancer, but for many other cancers, it's worth the money. But that becomes a political issue too. but that's no longer an issue in prostate cancer.
Yeah. So where does all this money come from?
Well,
Aside from the government.
First of all, NIH, mainly the National Cancer Institute primarily, and then some other ones. And then in the last decade or so, the Defense Department has gotten into the game for a variety of reasons, as has the VA, because they've realized that it's a major factor in terms of men's health. And so the Department of Defense also contributes money, as does the VA. So those three government sources provide money. If you have money initially to apply for grants, and then if you have the talent around you to successfully get the grants, that certainly helps, but it never is enough. For the reasons I just mentioned, it's never enough to pay for everything that we need to do, and it never is enough to attract talent so that you can do more research. And then again, there's also the facilities. I mean, particularly in this genomic age, all these machines that allow us to figure out the genes and type patients and stuff like that. Almost all of that has to come through institutional or private money that does not come from the government. And every time I turn around, the researchers, particularly the PhDs, need another machine, a bigger machine, a better machine, and drives me crazy sometimes how fast they need that. But then, of course, it used to be that to discover or sequence a gene was $1 million at least per gene, and it was a year or two, and now it's less than $1,000 and to type a person, and it can be done in days.
Yeah, and this sort of acceleration of economy of research, the idea that, as you just described, the opportunity to do high level, high bandwidth kind of investigations is now available to a lot of people, a lot of investigators, a lot of research, a lot of PhDs, doctors, and I should plug also my people, LCSW, social workers, who are also part of many teams. I'm an NIH-funded investigator, just like you, and others. The idea that you can now do bench level science in the most remote parts of the world is extraordinary, and opens the world of investigation to minds that we just didn't know exist. I mean, do you find that people that you would like to be on your team are coming from places you may not have even thought of prior to last decade?
I don't think that's so much. I mean, almost all the research that then ends up being transferred to some extent to industry occurs at the academic centers. Mm-hmm. And there aren't that many academic centers that have the bandwidth to do the kind of research that certainly I'm involved in, which is translational research, taking information from fruit flies and applying them to the bedside. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I would say that still comes through the major academic centers where the talent is, but at the lower level, in other words, getting the early talent, that comes from all kinds of sources. And I think with this increased availability of information, that it will, in fact, spread out to less remote places, as you said.
Yeah. Well, it's not only that a project has to struggle to pay for the time of its team, but also many projects just never see the light of day because they're just not selected for funding at NIH level or CDM or the Defense Department level or such.
Well, that's why all these centers you've talked about, whether it's Movember or the PCF, have been instrumental, particularly the PCF, at getting more and more people involved in prostate cancer research who never would think about it otherwise because there was an opportunity. And that, of course, was one of the great things we've done, is we've been able to lure more and more basic scientists into the problems of prostate cancer and whatever. And as I said before, when I started urology, Lance Armstrong would have been dead in less than a month. And now, of course, it was different. He rode the bike and everything else, although some people wish he had, but hadn't been cured. But the bottom line is that drama from a person who had what he had be dead in less than a month to being cured and whatever is. And I think I've always said that before I'm gone, I think it'll happen in prostate too, where so many things are happening. And that's because of the more availability of both government and private funding for research.
Yeah. And the last 5 years, 10 years, you would say, how would you characterize the last 10 years compared to the previous 40 or 50 years in terms of the acceleration of research and the extraordinary discoveries?
And extraordinary. And I would probably start, PCF started as CapCure in 2014. Movember started, let's see, when did it start? I can't remember exactly. 2003, and prostate cancer in 1993 when Michael Milken got it. And that just was unbelievable in its ability to increase funding. And both these institutions, particularly the PCF, which was initially called CapCure, getting the government to fund more money for research, much as it had done earlier for breast, was key.
Yeah. And as you and I have passed a few emails earlier, these organizations are lowering the percentage of money that has been raised. I mean, Movember towards prostate cancer, and Movember last year had 4.58% of its money raised as compared to like 80 to 90%. So like $1 donated to Movember, only about 4 or 5 cents goes to prostate cancer research, independent of overhead.
That's a little different because they're not, their primary focus, or at least a major focus besides testis cancer, mental health, and suicide, was not to do the basic research, but to increase awareness, to increase testing among men and that sort of thing. Whereas PCF, more of that raised money went to actual research.
Right. No, and fair comment. And certainly Movember's been instrumental in raising awareness, et cetera, and getting younger men involved in awareness building, as well as self-awareness around prostate cancer for their futures. Tonight, or today, whenever anyone's watching this, I mean, it is going to be available after our conference. The idea of being able to contribute to funding for the average person, in America, in Canada, and in anywhere on earth, as compared to like a philanthropy at a multi-million-dollar level. How do you think somebody should spend their $50 or $100 that they want to contribute to, advanced science for their disease, for prostate cancer? What's the best, most effective play for that person?
That's complicated. Depends on where you are and whether you're a patient or a patient's relative and that sort of thing. There are basically two avenues, and both need to be operational. One is the more national fundraising organizations, which then give the money to the local places. And then there's also the direct contribution to local places. Like, for instance, we have our Institute for Prostate Cancer Research. And when we have patients who, or families who are close to us and are directly related to us, then we encourage them to donate directly to that group. And then we also, if they're a little more remote, or they aren't near a major center that's doing a lot of prostate cancer research, these other places are equally good. The money doesn't come directly to us there, but you have to do both, and it's a little complicated on where it ought to be. We always say both, but if you happen to be in our group being treated by us, whether you have local disease or more advanced disease, then contributing directly to our group, which is is a pretty easy way, would be the best way to go. And in addition, there are many patients who have a particular interest in like immunology or immune therapy or in gene discovery or in um, uh, patient awareness type things. There's all kinds of different things. And for instance, in our group, in our Prostate Cancer Research Institute, we have 5 or 6 or 7 major areas which we are interested in receiving funding privately because one, we don't have enough government money, or because we don't have any because it's so new, and so still in the discovery mode. So the answer is a little complicated, and it depends on where you are, and also a little bit your preference. Some people say, "Hey, I want this research being done, in my area because I may benefit from it, and I want to give it to the Prostate Institute." Others say, "Well, no, I'm more remote, and I would just as soon give it to a national organization."
Yeah.
And
And your answer sort of lends support to the idea of localization of philanthropy.
well, if that happens to be, for instance, if you are being treated at a major center where they're doing competitive research, they have a lot of grants and this sort of
Yeah.
thing. Then donating locally would be the answer. If you're at a place that are being treated, or you are remote, then giving it to a more national organization is also important. We have to have both, and we would never have gotten where we are today without Movember or the PCF organization or Stand Up for Cancer. And we require those, and of course, getting money from those organizations is a lot different. For instance, for PCF, you just write a 5-page grant. You don't write a 50-page grant.
Yeah.
So both are necessary.
All right. So we do have to touch a bit on the politics and social aspects of research, in the sense that patients of color and patients of sexual minority groups feel that they're not included in investigations. Certainly, there's major push by industry, by pharmaceuticals and, medical device manufacturers, to be more inclusive, and appropriately so that people, whether or not disparities really do play into a biological setting, or a clinical setting, the idea that people are included lends authority and credibility to the outcomes of a trial or a research project. To what extent do you feel that you are seeing change in the philanthropic community towards funding research that is proactively inclusive of minority populations?
Well, as you know, in prostate cancer, the incidence of prostate cancer among Afro Americans is twice. The death rate is twice. Some of it is probably because of economic opportunity and this sort of thing, but there's also lots of evidence to suggest that there are proclivities among particularly the African American population towards getting prostate cancer or getting worse prostate cancer. So that we've been working on this for some time, and for a decade or more. If you write a grant to NIH, you have to have a section on there in terms of how you will recruit minorities, particularly for prostate cancer, the Afro-American minority. In Seattle, we don't have as great an Afro-American population as they do in Atlanta or whatever, but we still have to make an effort and prove to the reviewers of the grant that we are making an effort and some success at doing that. Now, as far as sexual preference and stuff, that I'm sure that'll be in the next series of grants. That what are you doing to make sure about that? In prostate cancer, I'm not too sure how that would play out, so I can't comment on that. But certainly, when it comes to minority groups, certainly Afro Americans, and to some extent Hispanics too, we have for some time had to address that issue.
Yeah. I mean, I could speak briefly on the LGBT aspect of it. NIH now has a grant program for sexual minority patients. Malecare, in collaboration with the University of Minnesota, got an R01 for 2.4 million to do a trial on intervention for gay men with prostate cancer. We've gotten R21s, which for our audience are in the $100,000 level, all based on their very appropriate understanding that we have to investigate all populations to explore disparities wherever they are. Black men we know about. Where are the other disparities and why do they exist? And what can we learn from those investigations that help everybody?
Right.
Yeah.
And, you know, that also goes to clinical trials and the results of clinical trials, because as you know, many of the clinical trials heretofore have been skewed toward one racial group as opposed to others. And we've had to realize that and adjust.
Yeah. So let's go back. So we have an audience with credit cards, cash, and checkbooks somewhere. Hopefully they have large resources, but I know many people are challenged economically. I mean, we obviously, and it's silly to even have to say this, but you know, if for people who cannot afford things, you know, to expend beyond their needs, then don't. I mean, no guilt trip. I mean, the whole point that doctors like Dr. Lange are in this business is to reduce suffering, not to increase suffering, you know, economic or otherwise. What do you, Dr. Lange, aside from, you know, hospital-based giving, large-scale giving, identifying a particular interest that you have, do you see patients actually going direct to doctors and saying, you know, I understand you got a trial, here's $10 out of my pocket? Does that make any sense? Or, I mean, we're
yeah, we see that. I see it all the time.
Yeah.
You know, I've had many patients say, what can I do? And we say, well, we have a whole operational system to contribute to what we call the IPCR, the Institute for Prostate Cancer Research. And we have a whole structure on how that money gets allocated, both in terms of what the patient wants and in terms of what we need and how we do that. And I think it's pretty fair. You know, we even had a button, because you don't want to say, well, you know, we need money for our research, and then the patient thinks, oh, gee, I better give some money because I want to get treated well. Well, we have all kinds of ways in which we make sure as best we can that never happens. And but we did for a while, and we still do have a button where we have ask me about my research. And because often we'll find that patients want to help, but by the same token, we don't want them to feel that they have to help in order to have us, you know, deliver good care, because of course that's not true. We give good care to anybody, and we have all these safeguards to make sure that we don't give the impression, either subjectively or subconsciously or whatever, that whether they contribute to our research has a difference in terms of how we treat them. We keep that separate.
Does the larger economic scene, like recession that we're going through now, I don't even know if it's appropriate to say recession, but we're obviously, the whole planet is challenged now around COVID and such. I mean, how does that affect or not affect generally research opportunities?
Oh, greatly. And you know, how the recession is affecting the very rich is one thing, but certainly in general, we know for a fact that that's going to decrease the amount of money we have available to do this. What it worries me more than money for a particular project is whether we are discouraging the next group of talented people who want to make a difference. Because certainly in medical school and in basic science, you know, many of them come in idealistically. They want to do something to make a difference, which of course, certainly in medicine among surgeons and internists and medical oncologists, if you want to do research or stay in an academic center, you need to come to the realization that you're not going to make the kind of money that you would make if you went out into private practice. And that's been an issue because it used to be like 3 to 4 times less. Now it's closer to something so that we don't, that we can keep the talent and attract them. They all don't have to be Mother Teresa's in order to engage in research. We realize that they need to do well enough financially so that that difference isn't so great. And keeping them, first of all, not luring isn't the right word, but attracting them to a life of research and patient care, for example, is one thing. To keep them there is also another issue that we have to do. And we've done pretty well. And I think the Me Too era is gone. I think people are beginning to realize that, you know, caring about humanity and doing something bigger than themselves is coming back.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean,
So that, you know, getting that new wave of people who have renewed their idealistic impulses is something I worry about a lot, because there certainly isn't going to be the money that we had a decade ago or
yeah,
even 5 years ago.
yeah. And the point of, to make, not so much live the Mother Teresa lifestyle, but to make enough to be comfortable and to be happy, because your day work is really gratifying, you know. Yeah, and it is hard to sort of keep people in the sense that as you become a significant, you know, as you're a significantly published person and reasonably well known, industry's knocking on your door with larger checks. And yeah,
For sure.
yeah,
And, you know, no matter what we do, we lose. But of course, some of it's picking the right person initially. And I have a lot of ideas about how you pick the person who not only uh, is idealistic to want to make a difference, but has the staying power to keep that going for some time. Because, you know, you start to have kids and kids' education and this sort of thing. And you look around at the other people who were training with you, and they're running around in their Teslas and whatever. And that gets to be an issue. And so it's partly picking the right people, and they're out there. And I think they're going to be out there a little more than they were in the last decade. Because I do think that if there's any good things about this pandemic and this world, it's that I think we may come out of this with a little more empathy toward what's around us rather than just ourselves. I'm hoping, and I think that's going to happen. And sort to have the resources to keep these people galvanized toward that is what is the challenge now.
I think that's a nice note to end our conversation on. So thank you very much for your career and for doing things that help us all live longer and happier lives. You're truly you're good. You're a good man, and you inspire goodness in a lot of the rest of us. So thank you for that.
Well, yeah, goodness is where it's at now. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.